Right, Ben Manning here with Jimmy from The Others. We're going to have a chat about this fourth album and everything behind it, and how you see things going over the next sort of year. I'd love to talk about, first of all, though, your influences, your kind of where you're coming from with this album and what you're trying to bring to it with the musical soundscapes there. Is it something that you're aware that you're taking in a new direction, or is it something that you feel is part of a tradition in the band? How do you see yourselves developing? So I'm quite interested in influences that you're comfortable talking about, your first enthusiasms in music, and just moving forward. As I say, the soundscapes on this album, it's incredibly impressive. It is a really tight set of songs, really, really great.
Cheers.
So. Just a bit more about you, really.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I was when I was a very young kid, I caught the tail end of sort of punk and new wave and post-punk and that's probably had the biggest influence on me, massively, and like a lot of sort of alternative music through the sort of 80s and 90s and beyond. I mean, I like a whole load of stuff from sort of soul, classical music, folk, country, all sorts, but that was the music that grabbed me, the sort of post-punk stuff, and I've sort of carried that with me, as the rest of the guys know. It's a massive influence, I also like bands like Suede and stuff like that, with a lot of sort of with a real good sort of pop sensibility, but with a kind of slightly left field leaning as well. So, and stuff like the Pixies and stuff like that, that's sort of noisy stuff but melodic, I really like. And I think with this album, I think like the first album, we sort of did the basics, and there was a bit of a punk DIY sort of ethic there. It was rough around the edges, but I think we've become, particularly on this album, more expansive, as you've probably heard. So we've really filled out the sound. We brought extra people in, it's a wider, more colourful sort of sound. But I think the influence for me, the influences that I've always had are still there. Even if we go to sort of stuff like perhaps the Strokes, even guitar wise, that sort of sound. If we get talking about something a bit more modern, but I just think and it's nice to play off more people. It's nice to sit down with some more musicians, and perhaps like the bits that I play are kind of less full on, so I don't have to be playing all the time. When you're the only guitarist, you got to play it all the time. So I hope that's some help.
Because your guitarists are quite multi-instrumentalists as well. They double up with a bit of rhythm and a bit of bass, and they've got a lot of talent. You've got a lot to choose from there. With the that one in the Pry Too Deeply, with your keyboard sound and everything else there, do you think you're looking to broaden into electronica or kind of psychedelic sounds, or is it purely going to be more the power pop indie sound, just a slight sort of, the Jam, people like that used to have a tiny little influence of things without going full on Pink Floyd, tiny little. Is it more just touching the surface with those experimentals, or do you think you're going to change the whole nature of the band? Might the band develop in a completely different direction? Really, how do you see it going?
Really, really good question, actually. I think the latter. I think it's more just an extra sound, I would say, personally. Certainly not probably electro. Maybe the way Steph plays, maybe a little bit of sort of psychedelia, a bit of 60s, but I would say it's more an extra. It's not actually changing the direction of the band, in my opinion. Good, but I think it's a really nice addition. But it's also cool that it's not playing on all the tracks either.
No.
Which I think's a good thing, because it gives it a bit more sort of again a bit more colour. I just think it's a really nice addition to some of the tracks.
Because Joe's a really strong, powerful drummer, and again, similarly, you're not sort of going down that predictable kind of sort of perhaps meat and potatoes sort of typical indie drummer. He's quite a sort of a guy that can cross all genres, isn't he?
He is.
He could be a heavy rock drummer, playing a bit of Motorhead or whatever.
He could.
Again, I'm seeing a lot of eclectic influences taking the band in a unique direction. Obviously, with everything at the moment, post-COVID, it's a very unsure kind of world. Do the songs, obviously a lot of the songs were written pre-COVID, are there any where it's kind of more coincidental than written intentionally, but are there any songs you think, wow, that really fits the current situation by accident or by design? Was there any?
Yeah, I think so. I think particularly in a track called Paranoid Times, which we wrote long before COVID, it seems to have been a bit of a predictor, really.
I love that.
So possibly that one. I think lyrically, probably Dominic would have more to say about that, but certainly I would say with Paranoid Times. But you think he deals with a lot of the same sort of issues. Sort of like just sort of like maybe some sort of worries of the modern age. Insecurities and stuff like that. But I would say particularly that song seems like a bit of a predictor.
I mean, it's kind of tough because the face mask you did a photo shoot, of course, Brighton Beach there, iconic there with you did a sort of little face mask bit as well, which reminded me of that bit with Jet Black when he had the oxygen mask on a few years ago, quite a bit. That was a brilliant idea. That do you feel it's kind of a metaphor, isn't it, for the artist, because the artist is kind of a bit jailed at the moment, kind of muffled and in a way that isn't so much to do with censorship, but as far as we know, unless you're a conspiracy nut, or to do with the health situation we're in. Obviously, with music changing and developing as years go on, it's very difficult to predict. But in the next 12 months, what are the plans that you've got to get to the fans, so to speak, if gigs do? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of virtual ways of doing things. What's the sort of game plan for the next 12 months? It's so uncertain. Do you have sort of gigs planned, studio space to record properly and all this?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is that we booked this gig for April in London, so that'll be the first gig in something like 7 years. And then hopefully we'll get this album recorded at some point this year to come out perhaps late in the year. So I think, hopefully we'll reconnect with some people that, used to like us, and Johnny will probably put this up on Bandcamp again, won't we? And sort of anyone who wants it can find it. But I don't think we've got any sort of other specific ideas. We're just hoping that the gig will go ahead, really, because I think that's probably our strength when we get to play live again. That's probably our strength.
Because record sales don't really get you anything now, do they?
No.
Which is a bit shocking.
You
grew up going down to Woolies and getting your record and thinking whether it's Band-Aid or whatever, the money was going to the artist. It is a different world.
It really is now, and I think bands have been making money out of merchandise, haven't they, for the last few years. I don't know whether that's still a thing, and presumably that's suffered a bit with the lack of gigs, I would assume. But it's not. This isn't really a money maker for us. It's just a nice way of reconnecting with the fans or the people that like us, and it's lovely to be doing it again. And as you say, it's kind of been unleashed, because I suppose all sort of musicians and artists have been held back, haven't they, like you say? So it's been lovely.
I think and that's a rich vein through the album of there's kind of a feeling of new direction to it, but there's a classic kind of, when you sing the old songs, you're offering extra dimensions to it. I remember reading about Field Music, that they won the Mercury Prize, but they only earned 20k a year or something, and they were talking about how hideous the music industry is from that perspective recently. It's such a dichotomy with the sort of image of the sort of people still have of, like, I suppose, the sort of rich rock star and all this, the glitziness of it. It's kind of it's a strange one, isn't it? Because you've seen big success, or you've got a certain amount of success. It must be kind of very strange, because we've seen the music industry kind of shrink, in a sense. So I think it's more important than ever for bands like you to come together and to keep it going, particularly at this time, with everything happening. So I mean, good luck with it, and I think that it's a strong set. So obviously from this concert you're talking about, you'll get a lot of extra media attention, and I would assume so.
We would hope so. That would be nice. We'll see what happens, but we'll certainly try, and hopefully we'll get some decent reviews. Hopefully some people will be pleased to see us back. No, I actually think you're winning partly in the audience for some of it, because I think it shows a depth that perhaps before some wouldn't have perhaps picked up on. That was perhaps always there a bit, but I think it's just brought it out a bit more. It's a really strong album, but I know you've got to push off. It's been brief, but it would be nice to talk longer, but I know you've got to step off and stuff for various reasons. But I think, as I say, I grew up listening to people like The Cure, and then later on The Sound and all these people. I hear a lot of influences there, but I do hear your own voice, I'm keen to say. And Dominic is such an individual, and I think what's lovely about him is he means it, doesn't he? Exactly.
And he's the real deal.
He is.
Because I think a lot of people forget that back in the old days, a lot of rock artists were very lucky. We had grants, we had education for free, and so a lot of artists, I think, didn't have to perhaps the grindstone of work. And I've always thought that was perhaps a part of the reason why it's a little bit more difficult for artists now. Would you agree with that?
I think you're right, it is more difficult now, but I think, going back to Dominic, I think whatever we've ever had levelled at us, the one thing is that Dominic's very, very honest.
Yeah.
And that comes across in the music, and it's one of the reasons that I like doing this, because I know that I'm there with the front person. Everything he sings about and talks about, he means. There's a passion there, there's a real soul in the true sense of the word, and that's one of the things I like about working with Dominic. And it was never about the money or the glory for us, and we did have some success, but I think probably because it's always come from the heart and soul is probably why we're still going. But yeah, I guess it is harder for people now. I think it's one of the reasons you've got so many solo artists around now. You can do stuff in your bedroom,
Tame Impala,
yeah,
playing every instrument.
Yeah, and I can see why it's got like that. I mean, maybe that's not quite the point you were asking about, but I think it has become harder. Hence, I think it's harder for bands to sort of to get anywhere at the moment, and I think people are taking it upon themselves to do the solo stuff. Is all well and good, but I've got a feeling we might have a slight return to bands, not necessarily just guitar bands, perhaps like soul bands, stuff like that. I think people will start perhaps getting collectives together again, and I kind of hope so. But I do agree, it has been incredibly hard over the last few years. There's no money in it, and I'm not complaining. We did all right,
Yeah,
It has been hard, I think, for people coming up.
Well, you're brilliant because you got the recognition that so many don't, and you write your own songs and all these things that so many artists don't even do. You've got all the credibility there. I think that I think that that's probably where we can leave it for you for yourself, because I know you've got to push off. But I really think it's a strong set. So thanks ever so much for the chat.
Thanks, Ben.
I think it will go places, very high places.
Thank you for coming and seeing us and hanging around with us.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. I've
Thanks,
got a lot of questions I'd love to ask you, Johnny, if you wouldn't mind. Just also about songwriting processes and everything. I mean, you write very democratically as a band, I understand, but I know that Johnny is quite heavy on the music side. Do you sort of, because Dominic is almost like, because I love writing lyrics and poetry a lot, so I used to write poems all the time, and Dominic's quite a beat poet in a sense. He's quite in a grand tradition sort of going way back. He's got that look, if he was around in the 60s, we'd been born then, he probably would have been a beatnik in dark glasses, reading it, a skinny guy reading it,
Yeah, that's right.
He's got that sort of classic, all-time kind of element to him, and you compliment him beautifully. It's just, I think that's part of it, also the personalities. You have very strong personalities in the band.
Oh, that's good.
Which is great.
Yeah.
And I love because I've always felt, growing up, that I was part of another crowd. I don't feel part of the crowd. I feel like someone who's other, whether good or bad. Of course, the automatic thing you think when you're a kid must mean you're bad because they've ostracised you, but not necessarily. No. It could just be for who you are. It might be because you're black, gay, whatever. It could be anything that they're being nasty about, or you just might be a straight white guy. They just don't like your personality.
Or you're very shy, or and you think you're alone, don't you? And I think that one of the, we're kind of very welcoming band, and I would say we are kind of for the sort of outcasts and misfits. We're not the only band that are, but
disenfranchised.
Disenfranchised is the perfect word, and I think we are definitely that. And going back to what you were saying about songwriting, it is very democratic. So, say I might come in with half a dozen riffs for a new project, and only one of them might work, and I'm fine with that. Fine with that, and I'm just happy then to work on other people's riffs, and I think my strength will be to put something over the top of these tracks, and I'm happy doing that. There's no egos. People don't come in and say you've got to use my songs, you've got to use my riffs and that, and as you say, it is very democratic, and it just kind of works. And if something's not working for Dominic, he'll say, and there's no point pressing on with it, because if it's not working for him, it's not going to work for the band,
Yeah, because when you look back through history, there's actually very few bands that have sort of agreed to a group credit more than often than not. If that happens, then one of them will say, no, I'm the Kingpin, Peter Gabriel or Phil Collins, whoever. They'll sort of try and take over. It seems extremely rare, and then you get like the cases of bands like The Jam where they've got a singer-songwriter, but the other two are sort of written into history a bit, whereas they might have brought more to the table than we realise. Yeah. They might be, and you look at the Stranglers, a group that have a democratic edge, yet they seem to have two in JJ and Hugh distinct. They could have gone down the Cornwell Burnell route like Lennon McCartney, but they never did. No. They kept it as a democratic band. I suppose you're more like that. You're more of a democracy on more of a Stranglers front, I would say, than trying to hog the limelight in an individual senses. If it had been Johnny and Dom that wanted to be the centre of it, like prima donnas, which is what happens a lot with bands, doesn't it?
And I think two things there. One is that with Dominic isn't a singer-songwriter as such because he doesn't really play an instrument, so he won't come along with a fully formed song, which I like working like that.
It's very likeable for the public too, because I think there's so many people who are musicians or have the ability but don't think they're good enough, and I think it's always important to have, not that John Dom isn't good enough, what I mean by that is if people hear that he can't necessarily play an instrument that well, they think, well, perhaps I could be in a band.
Well, exactly.
I didn't think I could because I can't play.
The old punk ethic again. To some degree. And then they might find they can play later on. Well, that's great if we can sort of if we can enable people to get up and have a go themselves. And the other thing, of course, is that I think Johnny would agree about this, that we haven't like partnered up. So say Johnny hasn't said, right, you and I, Dominic, are going to write the songs, the Lennon and McCartney, if you will, and I haven't either. So everyone brings stuff in. Steph, like for this album, Steph's brought 3 or 4 songs in. Steve on bass has brought 3 or 4 in, So we haven't had a specific sort of duet or duo, if you will, for writing songs. It comes from everyone and anyone. Joe could bring a song in if he wanted. Perhaps he should.
Well, the absolute extreme of that, of course, is Hawkwind, isn't it? Where you've got one guy who was the guy and like millions of different people, millions of different albums with millions of different credits, but it's all got a similar sound. It's kind of almost like a club. That's like the absolute extreme, and they're a very unique case, of course.
Exactly.
About as opposite from the punk ethic in a sense, but not. I mean, it all intertwines, doesn't it? God,
it does.
I mean, Quark, Strangers and Charms sounds like such a great sort of punk album in a lot. Well, you can hear the sort of influence.
Probably was vice versa. One of the influences, I guess, on a lot of the punk stuff.
Yeah.
And then another example would be someone like, I guess, Marky Smith, who...
I was going to bring him up.
Yeah, because he can just... The Fall is Marky Smith, as we know, isn't it? It's, like someone says, everyone's been in The Fall at some point, haven't they? But they retain that identity still.
I can't believe he's dead.
No, what a tragedy, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess like Shane McGowan, he's the Keith Richards-esque. I can't believe they're still all going. But I mean, he's an unusual one. I think that some people can write their own scripts and just go through life because he's supposed to not, he didn't mix with anyone in the music industry, apparently. He just went down his local pub. He didn't even mix with the band. So there's a real kind of extreme. And you can see the influence on Dom. But again, he was like not a sort of music industry person in the classic sense, though, Marky Smith. I mean, he was totally on of his own, wasn't he? I can't think of many other people that didn't sort of pander to... He didn't look after himself too well.
No, he didn't. But what a loss. We need more people like him.
Oh, gosh. I mean, even if someone like him, he's got such a unique personality, you feel in another era, he probably would have been like Coleridge and Wordsworth, he'd have been in with I mean, Wordsworth was working class, so people sort of tend to think of them as posh, but I'm sure he would have been a poet or something.
Definitely.
Going back through time, because he's so individual.
Exactly.
I think that's the feeling I get from Dom, because he works so terribly hard. I don't know where he gets his energy from. No. Let's hope he doesn't burn himself out. That's my only worry.
He hasn't so far. I'll tell you a little story, if I may, about how we met, because back in the late 90s, me and my friend, we put an advert in Melody Maker and NME.
Oh wow, those were the days.
Yeah, we knew, I kind of knew that we didn't want to limit ourselves to being a Brighton band, and I thought, ideally we'd find someone from London, and back then you'd get sent tapes, you'd send someone off a tape, I'm sure you know, and you'd get back all these unsuitable characters who were trying to put stuff over your music. And I got a call from Dominic Masters here. I can't do this, I have no way of singing over your cassette. And I thought, okay. So he said, I'm going to sing down the phone to you. So he did, because he just couldn't get it together. And we just say we'd had all these sort of hopeless cases applying, and all these kind of musos and stuff. So Dom just sang down the phone to me with our little music playing in the background, and I thought, yeah, he's the one. I thought that's exactly what I'm looking for. The vocal, his little sort of idiosyncrasies, the way he was singing and everything. I thought, yeah, definitely the one. And I sort of kind of liked the fact that he hadn't sent back a tape. I liked the fact that he was different, but he kind of had the sort of nerve to ring and say, I'm just going to sing down the phone. Anyway, that was just a little story about how we met, and I went and met him at Victoria Station, and we kind of this was pre Others Days. We knocked about a little bit together in a band, and then Dominic rang me a couple of years later and said, look, we're getting a proper band together, and that was the Others.
Wow.
But,
how it all began.
Little story, yeah.
Wow.
But again, that was Dom. I think that was Dom being unique and different from everybody else.
That's what you're looking for.
We've been in touch with,
Uniqueness, kind of individuality.
Yeah.
I think that's what the Others are about as well. Just being individual, being yourself.
Yeah.
Part of a movement, you could say. But yeah, I mean, it takes individuals to carry it on. So good luck to you for that. I mean, we're living in times, perhaps that we go on and on, that we're more accepting of differences than ever before, but in a sense one isn't so sure really, because in other ways we're very kind of, people are more kind of conservative in some ways than they ever were. You look back to the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, decadence is all down to opinion. I mean, it's like now with all the acceptance of different sexualities and races and almost being forced on people, you tend to think of this as a more kind of free era. But in a sense, like even what you're talking about, the freedom to discover themselves the way you did, probably now would all be a digital exercise. Finding people in bands all tends to be online. People send videos. Doesn't quite have that sort of homemade quality of what you're talking about.
Rawness. And I think we were lucky. I think we had something of the old school way of doing things. And
raw power, as Iggy would say.
Raw power. Yeah, the sort of rehearsing in dodgy, like we were talking about, smelly old rehearsal rooms and stuff like that. I feel fortunate that I managed to grab a bit of that, the stuff that all our heroes did.
Yeah.
So it is all a bit clean now, isn't it? And a bit clinical. Yeah, clinical, exactly.
Because Dom's like, I tended to be someone that's always like listens to so many different things. It's ridiculous, which is a good and a bad thing. Dominic specialises though, that's what I'm saying. What I like, he's very consistent with his he has his own niche, which is very much connected with the Marquis Smith, the Fall, and of course Iggy Pop.
Exactly.
And he's been sharing a lot of his favourite music with me recently. And there are actually, because I tended to sort of get for many years, I had a bit of a musical nervous breakdown. I only listened to everything from sort of before 1990 and nothing after really. For years I got into this very strange place. And Dominic, I think, has reminded me, whereas This Is the Kit or the various bands out there, that I think that's pretty good. I mean, I'd heard of people like King Gizzard, for example, who I went to see, and I've tried to open my mind a bit. But Dom's really opened my mind to some of the music out there, and he'll send me something brilliant, and I go, wow, that's great. It's like the Bunnymen at the end, that must have a lot of views. It's like 40 views only of really good bands. And I'm thinking, with all this, sending stuff all over the world, it's only gone up to 45 since he sent it to me a month ago, and I thought it was brilliant. So I don't know.
I know. There's just so much stuff out there, and a lot of it isn't going to get heard. I mean, there is some good stuff around at the moment. I think I tend to still enjoy Mac, and the guy that comes after is Mark Riley.
Oh, right.
There's some good stuff on there on Six Music.
That's great.
But a group I've heard that I really like lately are Bob Vylan. Do you know? Have you heard
Bob Vylan? I like that.
Do check them out. It's kind of like, it might not be up your street, but I really like it. It's kind of grime mixed with punk.
Oh yeah, I'll listen to everything.
Have a listen,
as long as it's good, I'll listen to it. Anything.
And it's very political.
Oh, great!
Have a listen.
Oh, well, that actually brings me quickly. I'll say one thing. I've had a real breath of fresh air actually about Dom, because for years it's been a sort of bugbear of mine, because you can't go near politics, it seems, in music. And anyone seems to talk about anything anymore. It's been the case for like 20 or 25, 30 years. So it's nice that Dom's got a bit of social comment about workers' rights in Europe and what Thatcher did. Again, that's it's wonderful to see it, and so unique now. I wonder why it's so unique. And to me, that's a real strong point too, worth celebrating. When I'm writing about him, I will harp on about that in a ragged trousered philanthropist kind of way. He put, he actually has the guts to make some comment, but Dominic isn't, impenetrable. What worries me a little bit, he has to have a sort of exterior of steel, because he will get stuff thrown at him for saying anything. That's why people don't say anything.
That was exactly what I was going to say to you. You have to be prepared to get slings and arrows thrown at you if you're going to be political in your music, I think. Dominic always has. I mean, obviously a lot of his songs are about internal issues, but going back to the first single, This Is For The Poor, obviously very political. Dominic isn't afraid of that. And as you say, you have to be prepared to take the flak. Either people who disagree with you or might think you've got things wrong, but at least he puts himself up on the parapet. And I think maybe these days musicians talk about political issues with a big and small P, but I'm not sure they put it into the music so much, but into their lyrics perhaps as much, apart from, say, listen to Bob Dylan, they certainly do, very much so. But yes, I like that about Dominic as well, and he's prepared to take the flak for it, which I think you have to be, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think you can't get a millstone around your neck, because that's why Weller shook off all that and
Red Wedge,
like the albatross when he he kept it on to a degree, but with the Jam he's supposed to have got sick of that spokesman for a generation, so he sort of threw all that off and sort of stopped writing about politics. And I always thought that was a bit of a shame, because he did it so well, or they did, if it was a they at all, which I'm sure it was a little bit. With his dad managing the band, there was never any way. That's where you're a brilliant democracy. Thank God. Also, I must say, do you get sort of nervous breakdowns about the Dominic sort of arrangement of lyrics, his situation with lyrics? Because it's such almost a David Bowie style of.
Oh, is that
reminds
right?
me a bit of it, doesn't it? I mean, he don't chop up the lyrics like Bowie.
Sort of thing.
He don't do that, but he does seem to. They're so sporadic. Hopefully, do you ever get worried he's going to lose all the lyrics?
Yes, yeah, totally. And it's like he's been carrying the same bag of lyrics around with him for literally, years, decades, mate.
So well, that's very Wordsworth and Coleridge again, Byron-esque. They all went round with a bag of poems. It's great. It's not on a tablet or a bloody just like everybody else.
It kind of is. I'd like to see maybe some kind of tidying up for his own sake, for his own
conserving
stability.
Yeah.
But then that's Dominic. He's not the most tidiest of people, and that's okay. That may be an artistic thing. Yeah, everyone's their own, but yeah. And it's not for effect, as you know, Dominic, as well as I do. That's him, isn't it? That's not for effect.
Well, also we live in a very cynical society, so most a lot of people watching or listening, again, there's another reason to bash. I think perhaps Dominic suffered with that a little bit, because I don't think people were prepared in the modern age for someone with a sort of old-fashioned kind of honesty, particularly in music, because so much is manufactured and created. They sit at home and think, well, how working class can I look, or how can I do this and do that? And in fact, they're all just, underneath completely different people, like actors. So there you've got it in a nutshell, I suppose, because music is a performance. So you will get your actor types, and then you'll get someone who's almost like a politician who's musical, or just is who they... Well, not politician, what am I talking about? Someone who... Oh, I've got myself in a hole there. But what I'm saying is someone who is not so much about, like, false person putting it over an act, is that they're actually being themselves totally, and it's quite unique.
It is unique, and I think that maybe sort of scares people in a way. And also, I suppose, if you're honest, you're going to make mistakes as well, aren't you? If it's not a persona all the time, you're putting yourself out there, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to say silly things sometimes, and that's going to come back at you, and you just have to take it. But I'd rather that than someone who's just this plastic sort of persona, So it comes back to that honesty and that realness, which he has got. He really has.
Well, yeah, he's given me some fabulous stories of people in the industry that you've met and known and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the media used to make a lot of fuss about, I think, Dominic's connection with... I didn't want to bring it up, but I know from looking through it, like the Libertines and all this. Do you think that was a help or a hindrance, though? Because...
Double-edged sword. I don't know what Johnny would think about that. I don't know what Dominic would think about it.
Never asked Dom about it because it's kind of sensitive, but...
they were close for a while, and I believe, I'm sure Johnny would possibly agree, it did get us gigs, didn't it, that sort of... I think, that sort of connection we had and a bit of press, so can't knock it at all. It probably might have become a bit of a double-edged sword, but But Dom was very good. He did go out and talk to people and got himself known, you know, in the very early days. He did a hell of a lot. He's a very hard worker. He really is
I know.
when it comes to music.
I couldn't believe it.
Much more than someone like myself. He'd be lazy and probably wouldn't have the nerve to go out and sort of do the ligging and all that. But he really did. He got things moving for us. And then
that's when I first met him, about 3 years after you did.
Yeah.
And then we lost touch for years. But I'll never forget, he was like a thing possessed. I'd meet him, he'd say, I've only had 3 hours sleep all week.
Oh, yeah.
I've done a gig last night, I got up 6 o'clock for work, worked 12 hours, then I did a gig, and then I got an hour's kip, and then I got up for work, and then I did a gig again. So yeah, I mean, I've never known anything like that before.
No.
So, not in anyone I've known.
No, I haven't. You know, we've all been in bands before, haven't we? And I think that it was Dominic's persona and presence and sheer hard work and determination that sort of got us off the ground. I'll always, you know, totally take my hat off to him.
It's lovely. Well, that's probably a good place to stop. I did say we were going to stop about 20 minutes ago. So no, it's been lovely chatting. It really has. And I think that I'm looking forward to hearing the final product. It'll be a while. I'll hopefully see you in the studio when you're actually recording them, putting them down. And I hope so. And I just can't wait for